over. We're recording this on Friday, May 5th. Last night, the Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, addressed attendees of the Liberal Party convention here in Ottawa. Meanwhile, out west, the campaign is underway for the next Premier of Alberta, while the clock is ticking to get federal legislation passed before the start of summer recess next month. Joining me now to break all of this down are two experienced political operatives and my colleagues here at Syntax, Jake Enwright and Jon Dugal. Jon, I'm going to start with you in just a moment, but Jake, we have a special guest, do we not?
Cranky Pants doesn't want to hang out with anybody else right now, so.
Okay.
That's great.
Jon, there are several policies that's being debated over the next couple of days at the Liberal convention. They include things like modernization of the Canada Health Act, installing guaranteed livable basic income, and lowering the federal voting age to 17. There's a ton of them. What is the likelihood of any of these policies making it beyond the convention floor?
In reality, I would say very low. Policies go to convention floors all the time, but this is really a way for the grassroots to let the leadership know what kind of the policy priorities of the grassroots are of the party. Obviously these are paying members that, there's several thousands of them that flew into Ottawa from across the country to let the leadership know exactly what they prioritize when it comes to policy matters, but also what they prioritize when it comes to party operation matters. Now, having said that as well, probably the most famous evidence of this would be actually in the Liberal commitment to legalize, which they did follow through on, but marijuana a few years ago. That was actually a commitment that came up from the Young Liberals of Canada, of anything, which got the support of Justin Trudeau back in the day, that came to the floor. It was voted on, it was passed, it ended up in Justin Trudeau's first platform when he first became Prime Minister. And so it does demonstrate that there is the possibility that it does make it into the platform. However, there are a number of policy resolutions that, quite frankly, I think are going to be laughed at by central leadership, even if they were to pass right now. Specifically, one coming out of Quebec around actually tabling effectively a roadmap to balance budgets within the next little while. And then perhaps maybe a bit more around the health side. There are a couple there that are very appealing to Liberals. However, it might be a little bit difficult for them to put into the window immediately. That's not to say it won't influence the direction that they might take in a platform, but to lift in place, I don't think that would end up coming on any number of issues.
Jake, what about for the party leader, him or herself? How important are these policy conventions for the leader of a party?
Not at all. I would argue they're probably more important for those who have their eyes on the next leadership bid to see where the party is moving. As you both know and has been demonstrated time and time again, speaking to the base is imperative when winning the leadership of a party. It doesn't necessarily set you up well for a general election, but that would certainly be a process whereby, Melanie Joly, Jean-Philippe Champagne, and some of the other folks rumored to be running to replace Justin Trudeau are really seeing where the tea leaves are and anticipating maybe what policies they would need to promise in order to garner more votes from the membership and secure that future leadership bid.
And a number of those folks were working the room last night very actively. So the mood is in the air. The Prime Minister did reiterate last night in his own speech at convention that it's going to be the honor of a lifetime for him to lead the party into the next election. So I don't necessarily see the knives coming out anytime soon, but those folks were there and they were present and they were very active on the floors last night.
Interesting. So as we're talking about party leadership, let's take that one step further. And Jake, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to go to an article that appeared in the Toronto Star last weekend, but something that we've been hearing a lot about. And that's with regards to maybe a rift, a little bit of a division between the federal and provincial Conservatives. In this article in particular, the Toronto Star was talking about Ontario Premier Doug Ford and the federal party leader, Pierre Poilievre. And I'm wondering, is that something new? And do those kind of divisions actually impact the Conservatives overall federally when they're looking at going into an election?
It's not something new, and I don't believe that those types of rifts will impact people in an election. I think voters are smart enough to differentiate between different leaders at the federal and provincial level and along party lines. What it does speak to is this ongoing, from a political outcome perspective, this ongoing issue the federal Conservatives have between speaking to their base and being more pragmatic. Doug Ford styled himself the premier of pragmatism. It's this long-standing tension within the Conservative Party between those who want their ideology to better reflect society and reality and those who want society and reality to better reflect their ideology. The federal Conservatives certainly fit more into the latter, whereas the former is the current provincial government in Ontario.
Jake, you just talked about elections, so I'm going to pick up to an election campaign we're seeing presently underway out west in Alberta between NDP, the two front runners rather, is NDP leader Rachel Notley, a former premier, and UCP leader Danielle Smith. They're both vying to be the next premier of the province, and that vote will happen at the end of this month on May 29th. As I said, it's the NDP and the UCP. John, where's the Liberals in Alberta? Do they exist?
No. Even federally, it's pretty tough to be a Liberal in Alberta. In fact, just as a personal anecdote, most of my friends that are in the Liberal Party from Alberta, they tended to move to Ottawa because of the fact they might have been in a Liberal in Alberta. And, in order to be a Liberal who was going to be employed, be able to make a meaningful contribution to society in a political sense, it was imperative that they end up moving to Ottawa. And I mean, you even saw it in the last federal election cycle, or I guess the previous one, where the Liberals had come in 2015, picked up a number of seats across Edmonton and Calgary, and then in 2019 they got shut right back out again, only to pick up a couple back in 2021. And now it's looking, tough for them to think about holding those seats again after the next election. So I would say it's a shutout for the Liberal brand in Alberta. No doubt relating in some way, shape, or form to the National Energy Program of years ago. The Trudeau brand doesn't hold up very well in Alberta, so that wouldn't help. But on the provincial side, they seem to be on the outs and, finding a tough way to even win one seat there.
Jake, what's your take on what's going on in Alberta? It's a 4-week campaign. Interesting, both Notley and Smith started their campaigns on Monday in Calgary. Where do you see this going over the next couple of weeks?
I think it all depends on who can frame the ballot box question to their desire. So if Rachel Notley is able to convince voters that healthcare is the number one issue, she's going to win the election. If Danielle Smith can convince voters the economy is the number one issue, she's going to win the election. Given where public sentiment is at right now, I would say that Danielle Smith has a far more compelling and persuasive ballot box question to present voters with. However, don't discount the air war. There is a treasure trove of Oppo research on Danielle Smith, and we can see it getting rolled out day after day after day. And when you're in an election and you're constantly under fire and you're ducking your head down, those things may not actually impact voters and how they perceive leaders, but it distracts your campaign from doing the things that need to be done to actually win an election. I used to joke when I was in a war room that what I did had nothing to do with actually winning the election. It was just all about distracting the other guys from doing what they had to do to win the election. So that's certainly a problem that Danielle Smith's camp is entangled in right now. They don't have a strong team that can handle these things under pressure. And so if this kind of tempo and pace of distractions keeps up, that makes it all the more dangerous for Ms. Smith leading up to the end of the month.
Sure, we'll be keeping an eye on that. And finally, before we go, I want to get both of your takes on this, because we're in the final weeks, if you will, for the House of Commons before MPs take their summer recess next month. And I'm just wondering, over the course of the next few weeks, what each of you will be looking for in critical stages, whether it be, more impasses or legislation, key pieces of legislation that gets passed, or politics itself, because we saw yesterday during question period, the Speaker of the House, Anthony Rota, got pretty dismissive with MPs and has decided he's not going to start calling on MPs unless they apologize. So where do you see things going over the course of the next couple of weeks? John, do you want to kick it off?
Sure, yeah. I'm looking for Anthony Rota. I think this is maybe the favorite story to any political right now, because it's just so exciting. It's MPs getting worked up, and rightfully so, over some serious allegations around Chinese meddling in Canadian affairs, whether it's on the electoral side, whether it's with the security of MPs themselves or their families, that's obviously an issue this government is going to have to take seriously. And the prime minister finally came around in his response after 5 days to say that, yes, we're looking at expelling the Chinese diplomat. However, we have to do so in a very reasoned way, in a cautious way, because we have to consider the ramifications, not only for Canada and our diplomatic and economic relations with China more broadly, but also for the ramifications against Canadians more broadly. I mean, obviously, this government is going to have pretty significant memory of the two Michaels over the past couple of years. So that's going to be in the back of their mind, I think, from a decision-making perspective. So I think that theatrics around everything going on in the Hill right now, with MPs quite literally being silenced in the House of Commons by the Speaker, which, by the way, I think is the most effective way for the Speaker to do his job, because had he just kicked them out of the legislature, he would have given the MPs a spoke box to just speak up from immediately upon their ejection from the legislature. It may have actually created more friction within the legislature rather than just muting their microphones for the time being. But that's going to be a defining feature, because it's also starting to pop up in some committees now, where it's starting to unravel at the committee level. It's really starting to impact their work. So is the government going to be able to get their agenda passed at the end of the day? They're getting some level of support from the Bloc at committee right now to move things along. They've also got the supply and confidence agreement with the NDP. So you have to think a couple pieces of legislation, key pieces of legislation, are going to move forward. That budget is going to be the big one, especially as it relates to healthcare, because of course the federal government came out with $200 billion or thereabouts earlier this year in a renegotiated Canada Health Transfer Agreement. That actually included a couple immediate top-ups to address immediately pressing issues, particularly in pediatric surgeries and wait times. And that's got to get passed in order to get the funding out there and get that into the provinces so that it can actually be administered to hospitals, et cetera, and start tackling the pressing issues of the day. So the government's going to have to put its nose to the grindstone here. They're going to have to give a little bit, I think, to be able to get their agenda passed, but I think they'll ram it through.
Jake?
I'm looking to see if the Conservatives can avoid their temptation to act too angrily. When Conservatives are pitchfork wielding Tories, it's never a good thing for us at the polls. And I think the level of anger that they've reacted with, while rightly so and justified on the issue of China, it's not matching the emotion of the public yet. And all it does is make the Tories come off, like I said, angry, and see that rhetoric being used in the speech Justin Trudeau delivered last night to the Liberal convention. It's always been an issue that Conservatives have struggled with, understanding that perhaps the public doesn't care about something as much as we do. And it's always been an issue of Conservatives to wait for the public to get to that fevered pitch before matching their emotion. A lot of Conservatives, especially those around Pierre Poilievre, who have influence in the party right now, they like to be the pointy end of the spear. It's not good enough for them to win on the China issue. They have to win and they have to get the credit for it. So if they can manage their emotion and take a more temperamental approach to the debate around whether it's China or other things, hopefully we're going to see that lead the Conservatives have opened up over the Liberals by 2 points widen. But if they don't manage their emotions, I think you're going to see things stall out for them pretty quickly. Canadians won't accept angry political parties or angry governing parties. Stephen Harper learned this the hard way.
I think he's right.
I think your daughter has a few things to say too, Jake.
She's not allowed to go into politics. She's going to be too smart for that, right?
Let's hope.
That's all the time we have for today. Thank you to my colleagues, Jon Dugal and Jake Enwright. I'm Janet Silver.